Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have three very special guests. They've just published a book. The title of the book is The Protocol That Kills, a True Crime Story. This really is a true crime story. And it was written by Sheila Skiba. Her last name is spelled Skiba. And a husband and wife team, Roberta and Alan Stalvey, last name spelled Stalvey. And you can check out their website at The Protocol That Kills. This book is now available on Amazon. I'll put a link into the show notes so you can check that out. And it's very cleverly written. It's written as a narrative, but also as kind of a legal document and with citations and references. I think it's very well put together. I highly recommend it. But I'm going to play the audio promotional video, which you can see on their website as well, about 3 minutes long, and then I will introduce the guests. So.
Did you know that a government-incentivized hospital protocol has led to the deaths of untold numbers of unsuspecting people? The Association of American Physicians and Surgeons noted, "We now see government-dictated medical care at its worst in our history, since the federal government mandated these ineffective and dangerous treatments, and then created financial incentives for hospitals and doctors to use only those approved and paid for approaches." The book, The Protocol That Kills, exposes the lethal regimen adopted by hospitals to maximize profits at the expense of patients' lives. This exhaustive expose provides a first-hand account of the protocol in action as it was invoked on an otherwise strong and healthy 52-year-old Rob Skiba, who was diagnosed with a viral infection by the admitting hospital. Within 40 days, this valiant Army veteran who had sworn to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, had fallen at the hands of a government-incentivized domestic enemy. This over 400-page true crime story uncovers every aspect of this lethal protocol in action, despite the protests of Rob Skiba and his wife. It includes disheartening text messages from Rob, who was locked away from his wife because she was forbidden to enter the hospital in the name of the protocol. Lawfully recorded detailed conversations his wife had with doctors, therapists, nurses, and hospital staff. Numerous pages extracted from the over 5,000-page hospital record that exposed the protocol that led to his tragic death. The testimony of a medical expert who provided his detailed analysis of the case. Invaluable and timely insights of a legal counsel who provides the story behind the story by providing crucial details and evidence, along with over 100 citations from clinical studies, medical journals, federal regulations, and relevant books and articles that prove Rob did not die of natural causes, but due to the perpetrator's insistence that he follow the mandated and inhumane protocol that kills. As Richard Bartlett, MD, says, this book shares a wealth of critical insights that will greatly aid in preventing future needless losses of life. The purpose of this book is to sound an alarm of a clear and present danger, as this lethal protocol is still being used against patients in hospitals all across America, and to provide you with essential insights that could help save your life or the life of someone you love. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. Get a copy today at theprotocolthatkills.com.
Sheila, Roberta, and Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us. I wanted to publicly thank Roberta and Alan, who have been friends of Rob and I for many years, and through this nightmare pretty much held my hand through the whole thing, even with the burial, and then afterwards helped me get the medical records, and we studied over 5,000 pages for thousands of hours, and I could have never had the energy or the ability to find what we found, and so I want to thank them publicly for helping make this book possible.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I mean, you put together a very important book, in my opinion, and you dedicated it to Rob, his memory. I mean, I just remember seeing him around in the Christian community, very active and very full of life until this whole harrowing situation happened. So I I applaud and you both of you for coming together and putting this book together is very important. So can you kind of talk about where it all started? I mean, we were talking in the pre-show, Rob was not feeling well, and one thing led to another, right?
Sure. He had gone to a conference in Ohio, Take on the World, and we usually went together. And because of COVID, he wanted me to stay home, and I begged him not to go. He had ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, but he wouldn't take it before because he was afraid it might affect the system. And he went on to the conference, and he came back. He wasn't sick right away, but then he started coughing, and he was coughing so hard that he couldn't keep the pills down. And so this happened. He didn't want to go to a doctor, of course. He didn't want them sticking a Q-tip up his nose. So he's very adamant, no doctor, no hospital. So this went on for a week, and he couldn't keep food down or anything. And the last straw was I took his oxygen saturation, and it was down to, I want to say 50. And then I freaked out, and I called the telemed people that had given us the medication, and they were frontline people. They told me take him to the ER. So I did what they said. I can't believe Rob even got in the car. It amazed me that he was able to walk down the stairs and get in the car. But anyway, long story short, his oxygen was so low, I felt he needed oxygen, and we were hoping that that's what he would get at the hospital.
Right. So you took him in, and this was September 2021. Is that right? Or was it?
The conference was the 23rd through the 26th, and then he went into the hospital on September 3rd.
Gotcha. So it was kind of at the very beginning of the pandemic, or whatever you want to call it, happened. So he gets in. What happens next?
And I want to back up a little bit. Rob had been doing a lot of research on COVID. In fact, after his death, finally got to look at his computer. He had over 200 windows open, and it all had to do with COVID. It was a deep, dark dive, and he had been looking at so many things that I did not even know that he was doing. And so he was blowing the whistle. He was helping people get medical exemptions. He was very outspoken. He was shut off of Facebook 2 months prior to his trip to Take on the World. So, I often wonder, was he targeted? I did hear from Steve Quayle on a show with Mike Adams that there was a supposed hit list. I don't know if that's true or not. I've tried to call Steve Quayle. He hasn't responded, but I don't really know what happened.
It wouldn't surprise me. It's odd that you say that, Sheila, because I was thinking that some people may have been on a list. And also, if they were dissidents or anti whatever, people can look their name up. They can be searched on the internet. Maybe somebody at the hospital found something. Like, that's how paranoid I am. But yeah, so he was doing some deep research, and he was known for being a deep researcher, reading, and he was always giving talks, right? All the way up to.
He did a lot of work on ancient history with a biblical perspective, a lot about the Nephilim, and which is very important to this story here. He talked about transhumanism and singularity, and he even prophesied in one video that he did that this end time scenario was going to lead to a vaccination where if you didn't take the jab, then you wouldn't be able to buy food. And this was in 2012, and you can see that video. It's on YouTube, and a lot of people have posted it almost as a prophetic warning. But he was very outspoken. It's taken us to South Africa, Canada. We would probably do around 4 conferences a year. I always traveled with him. It was an amazing journey, and I loved every minute of it. He was just about to touch his dream, which was a 72-episode television series called Seed. And I never thought he was going to die from this. I believed he was going to pull through. He believed he was strong enough to keep them at bay and not force anything on him. But later we found out that wasn't the case. They don't care about medical directives. They don't care if you have medical power of attorney. It was a prison. It had turned into a prison.
It's remarkable. Yeah. And you were together with him for 14 years. So you were together a significant period of time. So when he got in, they wouldn't let you in for 21 days, right?
Right, which I didn't know. I would have never left him there if I knew that was the case. The only thing they wanted to know when I left him, well, they made him put a mask on, which was barbaric because he was having trouble breathing. And I thought they would let me in after they got him checked in, but they wouldn't let me in for 21 days.
They were also very abrupt with you and him, right? Like, I mean, when somebody says, if you don't do this, you're going to die, it's almost like kind of like a behavioral modification. Like, you don't do this or else. Like, it's like incredible that somebody's saying that to a patient.
We knew that once we walked in, we were going to tell them no remdesivir. I didn't know as much as Rob, but I did know basics. So when I walked in, I was trying to give them the medical history. His dad had lost a kidney. And I said, whatever you do, don't give him remdesivir because genetically it may be dangerous. But the only medical history that they wanted to know was he vaccinated, which of course was a no. In fact, in the record, it says he actually put in the record that the mRNA vaccination was against his spiritual beliefs. So I feel that too he was targeted for that. And it's all over the record in bold caps. This was an unvaccinated person.
Wow, that's incredible. And they were trying to tell you that this was an elective intubation too when they did that too, right?
Yes.
As if like he okayed it, right?
Yeah. And see, we were talking to each other back and forth. If he had told me come pick me up, I would have been there in 2 minutes and helped him out. He never told me to come get him. But after studying these records for a year and a half, we found new details every day. And I personally think they tied him down and he went down punching personally. I don't know if we'll ever know. It was a very terrible 21 days, almost lost my mind. But I have to hope that this book can help save lives. And that's why I wrote the book.
I think it will. And they gave him drugs that I had never heard about. So it wasn't just remdesivir. They were giving him a rheumatoid arthritis drug, Nimbex. Like they really gave him were very expensive applications of pharmaceuticals, right?
And speaking of drugs, for those that don't know, Rob, he's very anti-drug. He was a vegetarian, a recent vegetarian. He didn't like the cruelty of animals. So he had started eating only clean foods and he was very anti-drug, rarely took an aspirin. That's one thing they didn't say. They tried to force a ventilator on him like the second he got there. And of course he said no. They never, ever got consent from me or him. And also when they did finally say that they were going to do it, I didn't have a choice in it. They did not share the amounts of drugs they were going to be giving him. I wish I had known that as well. It's unbelievable how many sedatives and how much paralytics. Nobody can breathe if you're paralyzed. It's just unbelievable.
It's almost like they put him into a coma to like make money. And the amount that they charged is off the charts. Like I couldn't believe it. Like my jaw literally dropped.
Yeah, the bill was $800,000 when I finally got it. I got the complete itemized bill. I got the 5,000, well, it was first 4,900 pages. I actually requested to get it again, just out of curiosity, because I could never find his signature. And I thought they must be missing pages. So when we got the second round of it, there were 300 more pages. In those pages, it actually showed soft restraints, which broke my heart. I don't know what they did to him in that 21 days. They tied him down to do a BiPAP. It's all in the book, and every day is detailed. It's a tell-all. It's every minute. See, when they yelled at me, do you want your husband to die? And if you don't put him on a ventilator, he's going to die. I knew that was a lie. After that call, my mom and sister were with me. I said, I need to record every single conversation that I have with these nurses and doctors because I want Rob to see how terrible it was. Then he could write a book about the nightmare of it. I never thought he was going to die from it. That's really the content of the book comes from all those transcripts. And that's the first thing I had to do was to type all those conversations, hundreds of hours out. And then Roberta turned those transcripts into more of a story, a day-by-day story. And that's kind of how we wrote the book, where we got the content. It's pretty clear every single day from those recordings.
And also he was able to text at the beginning. So you have the texts in there.
Yes.
So he's requesting help. It's almost like he's in a jail environment.
It was a prison. And he even said, doing everything, and these are all in the book. He said they're doing everything they can to get me to intubate, and then he said I'm dead if they do. So he would have never consented to a ventilator.
Right, and I think people even knew at that time the early onset of whatever was going around. I got some virus at the beginning of 2020, even before the shutdowns, that blew me away. I was sick for a week. I was literally prone. I should have gone to the hospital. It's unbelievable what it did to my body. Like my kidneys were shutting down. It was incredible. I was lucky to make it through the other side, but no, there were no warnings at that time. So I think something was going around even before March.
I believe so too.
Yeah. So I have other people who've had the same story as me, who were very sick at the end of 2019 or early 2020. Yeah. So he was also, he had no comorbidities too. He was healthy, right?
Oh yeah, he wanted to be in the same shape that he was at 25, at 50, and there's a picture of him in the book at 25 and 50. I mean, he got a trainer. He was working out twice a week. He was in the best health of his life. I mean, he looked the best he had ever. He was in shape. He was, like I said, he was very ate very clean. He exercised.
He was a military guy too, right? So he was in the military where, at least back in the day, they made you stay in tip-top shape, exercise, stuff like that. He was a helicopter pilot, right?
He was, yes. And he was, yeah, like I said, he was in the best health of his life.
And one of the things people knew, I lost my train of thought earlier, but one of the things people knew, even kind of early 2020, 2021, is that if you get intubated, it's like a death sentence. Very few people come back out of that. And so he probably knew that.
He did know that. And I really think he was probably making the doctors angry because he is very outspoken. Like you said, he's a military guy, and I'm sure he wasn't quiet about what he believed. The thing is when he would talk, he would cough, and you'll see the details in the book when we went through the pages, back and forth. They said they were harassing him on every hour, trying to get him to do things. And then when he would fall asleep, they'd give him remdesivir. I mean, and they knew very clearly our directives. It's all detailed in the book with the actual hospital pages from the record. You can't make this stuff up. It's just so in your face evil. I'd like the world to know and for people to know to prevent it from happening to their loved ones.
And it's happened a lot. I've talked to other people. I talked to Alan about this other website that's similar to your book title, which is Protocol Kills, or where you just hear more and more of these stories. You just hear that this happened to many, many people, and those bills are off the charts. Did they hand you that hospital bill expecting you to pay it, or was it covered by...
They would only send me 50 pages of it. He lived 40 days through this, which is very unusual to me that he lived as long as he did with the amount of drugs they gave him. It was a daily bill every day that you could see what they charged for. I just asked for it, and they kept sending me 50 pages. It took to ask 3 times before I got the whole 120 pages of the bill. And it's probably not important for the book, but I did get to bump my insurance up. It was a one-time chance to bump it up. I mean, we only had insurance for like if our arm got blown off. I mean, we never ever went, believed in the system of this medical system. We knew the truth about cancer and all that. Very anti-medical system. So we only had insurance for emergencies, and we were able to bump it up. I don't know if they expected me to pay it or not, but I'm pretty sure my insurance probably did pay for it.
Just paid for it somehow. Like, it's incredible that they charge that much. It's really incredible. I've had the same thing happen to me. I was in the hospital 7 years ago. When they handed me the bill, I was like, what? It was like $50,000. I was like, for 2 days or something. It was so the system doesn't work. Yeah.
Well, we know that, but then you start looking into the government incentives. I mean, it's just insane.
Right. And have you looked into how those perverse, I would call them perverse incentives, how those perverse incentives got drafted? Like, how did those go into... They went into the CARES Act, right? So it's actually some kind of Congress thing where they perversely incentivized all these hospitals, not just the one in Texas, to apply these crazy treatments that there were all their other alternatives to.
I'm going to let Alan share with you some of the things that he found.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. That it's an insidious incentive system, and we think that needs to stop. And it's incentivized to benefit the hospitals. And what's happening is profits are being put ahead of patients, and patients' rights are being shoved to the side. And when you have someone that is going to be a cash cow for the business, you do kind of hold them prisoner. And you end up saying, well, we can't let this person leave until they have the full protocol, which is 5 total doses of remdesivir. If you're intubated, they increase it to 10. How lovely, how nice of them. And then again, we explain that in the book, but how you go through the whole protocol to the benefit of the hospital.
Right. So you're putting in these protocols that incentivizes them to do that. And like Sheila said, like, they're giving the drug while he's asleep. Like, it's unbelievable. These are just no informed consent, no Hippocratic oath, do no harm. It's off the charts what they did. And like, I think you said you knew somebody else who was also in that hospital too, right, Alan? Like, at the same time?
I went to get my teeth cleaned, and I never have had a dental hygienist ask me what I do for a living. And this isn't all I do, write books, but it seemed to be the most relevant, pertinent thing to answer the question, because she asked me, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm currently writing a story about a murder. And that surprised her a little bit. And she said, well, where was the murder? I said, it was actually in a local hospital. And she said, "What hospital?" I told her the name, and she about fainted. She said, "When?" And I said, "Well, in October of 2021. She said, "Oh my God, they murdered my father in the same month, in the same hospital, in the same ICU as Rob Skiba." We later found out that that was absolutely true. We met with her in person, and Sheila went through the hospital records and reviewed them and found that her father had suffered with some of the same doctors and staff, from the same therapies and drugs, from the very same badgering and the very same protocol, which led to his death as well. And she knew what was going on, and she was powerless to stop it. There was no other place to take him. He was struggling. And he too, guess what, was unvaccinated. So the question is, was there an attempt to make an example of these people? We have heard stories of individuals who've gone into hospitals that were vaccinated, and they put forward every possible effort to save their lives with conservative treatments instead of forcing the full protocol on them.
Wow, that's incredible. It's very sinister to think that, especially what we know about the shot, right? What people are calling the vaccine now, which they didn't know back then. They believed the kind of hype about the shots, but now we know it doesn't prevent against transmission and all this other stuff. So it is incredible that they went off. So maybe that's it. And I've heard other stories around the country where they're trying to find out people who didn't take the shot. So it's there may be something very sinister. This was super sinister. Like, this is like, how did this? And this is a larger example of how institutions can be corrupted from the inside, how administrative bodies, like a different form of warfare, really.
What's really, really sinister is that now babies get the COVID jab on day one. They've made that on their list. They get the COVID jab on day one. I don't know if it's that in every state, but I know that's in Texas. And I did also call the hospital to see if they're still giving remdesivir, and that is still their protocol for, quote, COVID or pneumonia.
Incredible.
Or
It's unbelievable that there people know, like, the facts are out there that this was tested before, and like half the people died. Like, it's off the chart. So it's the intent to harm. That's what's really incredible. Is obviously.
It's premeditated murder, and that's the only way to look at it. And I would say another thing that is a consistent way that they do it, because there is a script, and I'll say script because every single person that I've talked to has the same story it's like a script.
It is interesting that you use the word script, because I know that the government was handing out kind of scripts about people, like about vaccine resistance, about other things, like literally so that people could actually answer, like be pre-conditioned or pre-trained to answer complaints from the public on different things. So I would deduce that these kind of scripts were handed out to all the hospitals in anticipation of resistance. Yeah.
I'm praying that someday we can find these actual records, because I don't know when the switch was flipped, because there had to be a day where they all got their script and then they just started doing it. And so the thing I was getting at was, after they moved him to the 5th floor, they put consult palliative care, pretty much, which means end of life care. Just keep him comfortable until he dies. Well, Rob's oxygen had went from a 70 to a 98 when they gave him supplemental oxygen. So why didn't they just put him on a regular floor and let him have regular oxygen? But we found out later they were giving him way too much, and they were doing more harm than good with the oxygen alone. But to put palliative care for a man that's in great health, except this respiratory, probably pneumonia, I think is so barbaric. They also did it to the other lady we were talking about. Her father had palliative care on his record. And then I met a lady yesterday who I hadn't seen in years. Her mother was killed in the same area, but at a different hospital. And they put on her chart palliative care. So this is something they do. If you don't want their protocol the way they want to give it to you, then they just pretty much write you off and say palliative care.
It's incredible.
Oh, it's incredible. They stopped feeding you. And that's another thing. He was texting me, no food, no water. This is a theme throughout all the people that I've talked to. I don't know one person that I've talked to that this happened to that was vaccinated. Most everybody I asked, it was unvaccinated. They were starved. They were dehydrated. And then when they said no to the ventilator, they were put in their chart consult palliative care. So they were just writing these people off.
Early, right? So that palliative care was early in the records of Rob, right?
Oh,
I
yes.
mean, yeah, that's what's strange. Like, it wasn't at the end of the 40 days. It was like in the first week. Like, this is off the charts. That's just criminal acts over and over. So I know that there's lawsuits against remdesivir here in California that are taking place.
So I'll read you this. It was day 2 in the in quotes impression and plan written in the hospital record the day after his arrival. They wrote COVID-19 unvaccinated patient does not want intubation. Consult palliative care, which generally means end of life. So it appears they wrote him off because of his unvaccinated status and because he made it crystal clear he did not want to be given remdesivir or be intubated and placed on a ventilator, both of which greatly upset those people, is what I believe. And that's all in the record.
Right. I mean, it's incredible. Like, you have a very thorough records of all this stuff. I mean, you have it all in there, and the kind of legal, you lay the book out as kind of almost like a legal thriller with all of the reference and stuff. Can you kind of talk about that approach?
Oh, sure. Sure. And so you can read the book in 4 ways. You can read it as a true crime docudrama. You can read it as a legal brief. You can read it as a body of evidence. And I'll let you want to kind of break that down.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, if you read it as a true crime drama, because some people said, my Lord, this is 400 pages. That's a lot to read. Well, that's true. It is rather large, but we wanted to tell the complete story. And we didn't want to leave out any of the critical details so people could be forewarned. But if you want to read it, though, as a docudrama, as a true crime docudrama, then just read the narrative in the story and skip the legal counsel statements and the appendices. But if you wanted to read it as a legal brief, then you can read the over 130 legal counsel statements in turn, one after the other, that have over 100 citations, as it mentions in the intro video, from clinical studies, medical journals, federal regulations, and relevant books and articles. And if you want to read it just as a body of evidence, then if you just read the appendices, it would blow you away. We have an appendix on 12 pages of incriminating key facts that would be presented to a court. And there was a plan to present it to a court, and we can explain why that didn't happen if you'd like.
Please do.
And then there's the second appendix, which is the detailed analysis of the medical expert witness. The third appendix has over 50 notated excerpts from the hospital records that clearly detail that he didn't die of a natural death and all of the things they were doing and the badgering and the rest of it. Then there's an article and another appendix on the hospital's incentive payments that clearly spell that out. An appendix on Title 42 of the Code of Federal Regulations if they violated. An appendix on the University of Oxford study on budesonide, which he was initially refused, that could have helped save his life. And then an appendix of a list of the questionable drugs and dosages that Rob was administered during just a 3-day period. As one person said, that's probably enough to kill a horse. And then the darkness exposed by Sheila's conversation with a respiratory therapist with over 35 years experience in the field, who exposed some of the darkness behind this protocol and how he'd seen it invoked on many, many other patients, is in an appendix. And then the last is evidence of the falsification of the hospital's consent forms, because there were forms that were supposedly, allegedly consent, and there was something scribbled on them, but it surely wasn't Sheila's handwriting, and it surely wasn't Rob's. And I won't tell you the rest of it, but you look into the book, you can understand how that came about, and even letters and emails back and forth with the hospital, including the dialogue of an in-person meeting at the hospital with the staff member who actually wrote that on the form.
The witness, yeah.
The witness. And so it's all in the book there. But the last way you can read it, the fourth way, is as a complete day-by-day chronology of the 40 days that Sheila and her husband had to deal with this and how he became a victim of the protocol. So you can read that interspersed with the legal counsel statements that provide the story behind the story. And the legal counsel brings you information that Sheila was not aware of at the time, which kind of like you're watching a movie and then you can see that somebody's behind the door and the actor in the movie doesn't see them. And you're like, oh gosh, I know what is about to happen. The legal counsel steps in and provides you that level of insight of things that Sheila didn't even know at the time that she later discovered, and then points to all of those citations we talked about.
Right. I mean, it's very well researched. If you look through this book, you guys did immense amount of research and things like that to put this whole book together. So the people who've gone through this protocol would do themselves a huge favor to just look through all this and use this as a baseline for other causes of action or anything. And I hope these lawsuits really go nationwide. These medical groups and these hospitals have to pay out for what they've done to people. I mean, it's intended. I'm surprised that there's no. I mean, it shows you what the DOJ is all about. The federal government's a mess, but at least the states can take action against these hospitals and things like that. So I'm hoping they'll these DAs will pick up the pace or attorney generals of the states. What's that?
As long as they're not the ones bought by George Soros. But I will say, ironically, Rob's last presentation that he prepared for Take on the World, which he didn't give for whatever reason, it was called Revelation 12 and the Nuremberg Code. And so I just find that interesting.
Right. And the Nuremberg Code was all about consent, right? Or like you're supposed to have informed consent for everything. Yeah.
It was medical experimentation. This was I think last year was the 75th anniversary. It has to do with medical ethics. And I found it so unusual that nobody's talking about it. So I dug into it. And the only person that I could find was a Holocaust survivor who actually republished the code. It's just a little book. And they're very simple, and most of it is just basic human rights. Like, you can't experiment on somebody. You can't. They should have a say in their treatment. You can't badger them. You can't force them. Which is everything in it. They violated, Rob, with that code.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, and so you got this guy Sammy Wong as a medical expert was in there.
Yes. So
you could really covered your bases, legal, medical, things like that, and just compiled it into a very easy to follow narrative. So I commend you for that.
Thank you.
Also, I've come across something interesting. Have you ever thought about implied warranty? That there's a legal cause of action that, at least in civil suits, is that a lot of these drugs that have an implied warranty that they'll actually be efficacious, and they're not. And I haven't heard anybody really talk about the warranty aspect of the treatments and the drugs and things like that. Like, have you guys come across that, Sheila or Alan?
I don't know about implied warranty. Of course, you're bringing up a valid point. One of the things that we raised as an issue in the book is that the hospital protocols, and especially this insidious protocol, is one of drugs, of course, and other therapies, which we explain in the book, what to watch out for and what to be warned of. But what's really insidious, and the legal counsel gets into this in many legal counsel statements and some of the hospital records, is many of these drugs will actually cause more problems. And when they cause the problems, the symptoms that crop up, there's a drug for that. And then that creates another problem. And there's a drug for that. And then that leads to another problem. And there's a drug for that. And the next thing you know, the individual is on massive numbers of high doses of liver toxic and kidney toxic medications. And so it's almost like if you went to a buffet, and let's say it's a Chinese restaurant, and you wanted Indian food, and they'd say, "Why are you here?" Or you go to a restaurant that only serves chicken and you ask for a beef dinner. And so when you get into these settings, it seems to be a protocol of drugs on top of drugs on top of drugs. And Sheila combated that daily and did everything she could to advocate for Rob during the 21 days she was locked away. And then during the period of time they allowed her finally in the hospital. But she tried to get them to stop these drugs and to lower the dosages, and all they did was increase them. And you'll see as you read the story, those of you who've not read it, if you get a copy of the book, you'll see how insidious this is and how it led to Rob's demise.
Yeah, it's incredible. Unfortunately, that's the entire big pharma business model, is solve the problems they create with one treatment by their own treatment. So it's incredible they got away with all this stuff. But we are at the 37-minute mark. Is there anything you guys would like to kind of conclude with, and can you talk about where people can find the book?
Well, I want to just say one thing that's a misnomer. There's something called the right to try, and I just want you to know that's very deceptive. The right to try is after they've done all their protocols, then you have a right to try. I begged for budesonide on day 1. I begged for it day 2. I begged for it every single day. They finally gave it to them, but only a very minuscule dosage, which was 0.5. And so anyway, I wanted to clear that up. But to wrap this up, I believe my book is unique in a number of ways. And my biggest desire and goal is to see lives saved. I wanted to go far and wide. We changed the names of the doctors and the nurses and the hospital so that it could be more universal. It's a universal story. People can relate to their own experiences. And so I believe it's the most in-depth expose ever written on the protocol in action.
I would agree with that. Alan, is there anything you'd like to add?
One of the things, you mentioned this too, William, and I like this about the book. It's something that actually was an insight that came to my wife, Roberta. We were going to write a memoir for Sheila of her 40 days of trauma and the experience, the nightmare that she experienced. But Roberta felt a leading. She said, you know what? I can't write this book this way. We have to write this in a different way. We need to allow the readers to become members of the court of public opinion as they see the horror of what happened to this man, and let them judge for themselves if he died a natural death or not. And that's what brought the legal counsel idea in. It's a different perspective than most any other book. I mean, it's written with 7 voices. I'll just end with this. Sheila's day-to-day perspective throughout the 40 days that she and her husband struggled in the hospital. And then Rob's own perspective with text messages that are included in the book. So that's a second voice. The third voice is a perspective of her family and friends that were trying to help her and advocate for her, and a doctor that came in and tried to assist her from California. That's in the story. And then a legal counsel perspective and those legal counsel statements with those over 100 citations we talked about. Then the actual words, because she recorded by law, state of Texas, a one-party state. You can legally record any conversation you're a party to. She recorded every single conversation, whether it was by phone during the first 21 days or in person during the time she could spend in the hospital with Rob. And we got all that dialogue in the book, word for word, what the therapists, doctors, and nurses and staff said to her. And then the voice, number 6, of a medical expert witness who is an expert in over 100 cases. He's presented expert testimony over 30 years, and he has taught medical ethics. And he actually is one of the people who's a voice in the book. And then lastly, valuable extracts from the over 5,000 page hospital records that are notated in detail that shows doctors' biases, negligence, malicious intent, and harmful therapies. And so there's nothing I think has ever been written at this level of depth and this thorough on this protocol.
And if I can just share one last thing, these government incentives need to be stopped, and hospitals and doctors who practice in these facilities, they need to not be financially motivated, because that's a dangerous, it's a conflict of interest is what it is. And so what I want to see the amount of people in that hospital who died, who were unvaccinated, how many got put on a ventilator that were unvaccinated, and who were vaccinated, because I was told by a local pharmacist that nobody who was vaccinated got put on a ventilator. I want to know if that's true. And I also want to know how much money the doctors made. And I'll end it on this. This is something Rob always said. There are more of us than there are of them. We can stand together or we will die alone. So let's stand together.
Amen. And those things, that information needs to be disclosed through discovery, through litigation, so that the American people can know these facts. Who made the money? Where was the money going? There's been more documents coming out with a whole shot incentives, and those are being publicized. It's incredible. These people are being incentivized to apply these treatments that really aren't, they don't have autonomy. They don't have any sovereignty. It's something incentivized by the government. So, and this is one part of it, and it's just a tragic story. It's terrible.
If anybody has any advice or legal, we tried to go that route, but I felt like public opinion was going to move this mountain much faster and further than a court case. But I would like to do something legally, and, like you said, to get the documentation to find out when was that switch flipped and how much did they make? And is it true that the unvaccinated were targeted? Because that's discrimination. And so if there's anybody out there that knows how to go about getting those facts, I would be very interested in finding that out.
Well, some of these lawyers who are suing, at least on remdesivir, may get some knowledge. It might be made public. Where's the best place for people to get the Protocol That Kills?
Okay, well, you can learn about how to buy it at theprotocolthatkills.com. We have a buy now page. It's currently available in paperback on Amazon. It actually became the #1 bestseller in the medical ethics category within 24 hours of its release. It popped back to #2 right behind the True Anthony Fauci, story written by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And we are working on getting a hardback available any day now. And we will then have eventually a PDF version for people who want to download it in PDF form. It's keyword searchable.
Excellent. And then the best place to reach you guys, Sheila Skiba and Roberta and Alan Stalvey, is at your website, www.theprotocolthatkills.com. Is that correct?
That is
correct. We have a contact form there, and it'll reach all of us if you want to get in touch with us.
So if people have any additional questions or anything like that, but I highly recommend this book. Very thorough, superbly well researched, and tragic. I'm just terrible that this happened to Rob Skiba. It's just so I appreciate you writing this book to memorialize him as well. So thanks so much for your time, and congrats on publishing the book. It's just been out about a week, right?
Oh
Yes.
yeah, just a week.
Just a
And
week.
thank you for your kind words as well. I appreciate you having us on.
Anytime. So let's keep in touch, maybe if we want to do a second show. But again, for people, get this book, The Protocol That Kills, a true crime story by Sheila Skiba and Roberta and Alan Stalvey. And I will put a link to the website in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.